The story starts with our MC saying, "Who is the absolute leader?" When the hero swings his leg to strike, everything turns into rubble. He makes a powerful blow, smashing everything around into small pieces with the release of energy. A crack appears on the stone block. The gray fist breaks through it. Titan was already leading the fist straight to the protagonist, but when he jumps, it can fly to the very sky. He was approaching his huge opponent at great speed. Suddenly, the big guy began to suck in the surrounding energy. He released a purple beam from his mouth straight toward the hero, but when he raises the blade and begins to swing it, a strong wind blows. The tailed one, with a smile, raised the blade in which he collected energy. A powerful explosion of aura occurs. He used meteoric speed in a powerful blow of the sword. Then the huge creature received a blow to the throat and lost its head. The Taoist rushes at great speed through his body because his power is the will of God. The black-haired man goes far ahead. When he defeated his enemy, he stops and says that he hasn't fought like this for a long time. Then the guy turns around, standing behind the head, and offers to finish quickly. But the creature turns to him and says that if he kills him, then outside of this place he will be trapped, and asked if he decided to die along with him. But then the swordsman, with a smile, went to him and said that he hadn't thought about it yet, but he would still die sooner. The creature looked at him again and asked if he really wanted this so much, and asked if he wanted to defeat him. Suddenly, a reflection of the galaxy appeared in the monster's eye, and he froze. A large rift occurred. The blade immediately pierced it. From the blow, a powerful aura and bright light began to spread everywhere. And then the hero said something unintelligible. With a slight smile, he immediately froze in a powerful stream of light when he told him to step where he wanted. The scene shifts to the Imperial Palace in the Forbidden City, and the palace was originally planned to be the largest and most magnificent building in the country because the emperor himself lived there. But everything was not so. Another palace. Consingen was more magnificent and majestic than the emperor's palace, and this meant that its owner stood higher in status than the emperor of the empire. The hero was lying upside down from idleness and was the very owner, an absolute warrior with enormous strength. He closed his eyes and said with displeasure that this could drive one crazy, and wondered what he could do besides martial arts. Suddenly, the guy jumped to the window and said with a displeased look that he should not have taken this position at all and should have done something else. But suddenly, he again refused his words. And then he started shouting in rage and said that he shouldn't have been born at all, to which the servant immediately told him that his subordinates could hear him. But he didn't care, and immediately asked if it was true that he shouldn't speak at all. Then Yurchin calmly said that he should be able to control himself in his body, but he immediately became indignant at being scolded. Suddenly, the hero looked at him menacingly and asked if he was standing behind him to protect him, to which the servant answered in the affirmative. Then the protagonist imagined their ranks and asked where it was seen that a tiger could protect a dragon. Then he took off and asked if he could fly, to which the servant immediately said that he knew that he was much weaker than him, but in an emergency he would be ready to sacrifice his life for him. The black-haired man was immediately wildly surprised and asked if he was in danger, and then said that he really needed it. He immediately imagined hordes of enemies and shouted a question about why no one was attacking him. For example, a secret force hiding in the darkness and wanting to overthrow the government, or, for example, the same foreigners. The hero poetically put his hand up and said that it could even be treason for selfish reasons, to which his subordinate calmly said that all the elders who were plotting conspiracies were finished, and his subordinates were already investigating the invasion of foreign citizens, and everything had long been decided. But then his gaze was filled with a thirst for murder, and he said that if he finds out that the elders are planning something again, he will immediately kill them. To which the protagonist immediately asked why they should be killed, because the elders will not live long anyway. But he did not hear him, and said that if the elders are unhappy with him, he will kill them all. The hero immediately looked at him with horror and demanded that he stop, because this already looks pretty scary. But judging still did not listen, and said that then they should attach a special surveillance group, to which he thought with horror that from the outside it looks terrible. Suddenly, something from the outside attracted his attention. He immediately grabbed his blade and, with a smile and sarcasm, said that someone was at the front door and asked if he felt this energy, and said that he hoped it was a hired killer. Suddenly, a huge man appeared in the passage. He immediately stood at attention and screamed about 100 million lives. He fell and hit his forehead on the ground while continuing to praise his ruler, and the ruler looked at him with aggression and said that he asked him not to do this. Sangrim immediately looked up with alarm and decided to try to justify himself. Then the hero sat down more comfortably in the throne and decided to mock him, asking how he dared to be impudent to him, and who allowed him to raise his head. The big guy bowed again and said that he deserved to die, to which he immediately asked if he really wanted to be killed, to which he heard an affirmative. The black-haired man, with a smile, immediately released his energy and said that he would not hesitate, and then asked if he was mocking him. But then he calmed down and lowered his gaze, saying that it took more than 2 years, and then asked how the people in the Western region were doing. He imagined several magicians at the pentagram and said that he heard that in the West they invented firearms that are superior to what is in the dynasty, and if in the Central Plains they practice martial arts. The hero immediately assumed an extremely interested expression and said that if they were a threat, then he should think about protecting the people, and asked if this was true, and then asked what would happen if they were stronger and there was a war, and then said that then he would have no other choice. But then the unexpected guest became embarrassed and said that they were in the West and it was somehow inconvenient, to which the protagonist immediately got furious and asked why he didn't tell him right away. But then, judging, decided to intervene and said that the leader wanted him to speak informally, clearly and factually. Then the big guy looked at him with a little surprise and meaningfully remained silent. Then he even strained his neck and shouted that it was just awful. They continued to have a friendly conversation for some time. Then the hero lowered his head with regret and exhaled and asked if it was true that they had managed to subjugate 70% of the leaders of the magic faction, and then said that he had asked them not to arrange random skirmishes. But then the red-eyed man looked away with some regret and said that they were using dark power. He remembered how he stood on the mountain in front of the tied-up magicians and said that they had refrained from bloodshed as much as they could, and he immediately asked if they were really that weak, to which his general again recalled the past battle with the magicians and said that their abilities were excellent, but it seemed that their magic had turned into some kind of skill and not a technique, and something like calling rain, thunder, or lightning at great distances. Then the hero leaned back and exhaled with regret. Suddenly a book and a crystal were handed to him. He raised his head a little and asked what it was. Then the soldier, still sitting in front of him, said that the head of the Western region mage faction gave it to him and said that their ultimate goal was alchemy. He imagined many flasks and vessels saying that. They said that this was a technique that combined lower-level materials to create high-level materials, such as making gold from stones. The protagonist looked at the book in surprise and asked if this was something that scammers on the streets usually did, to which he said that this time it was real knowledge. He raised his head a little and said that the final goal is alchemy, and therefore this is a chance to enter a new world, and the book describes the method of using alchemy. The hero opened the book with interest and asked again, while his servant in the background suggested that this was an ordinary fairy tale. The warrior lowered his head, closed his eyes, and said that a delegation of magicians arrived with them, and therefore they could ask them directly. A blue-eyed girl appeared in front of him, who folded her hands in greeting, and was a representative of the magicians of the West. After she sat down, she was asked if something could be done with the help of this book, because nothing was clear yet. Then Mulder stood up, lowered her hands, and said that theoretically everything was possible, but in practice it was difficult to implement, to which the hero immediately said that it was quite interesting and asked how she learned their language so quickly. She looked up and, imagining the streams of information, said that this was one of the new skills that allowed them, foreigners, to quickly learn their language. Then the Taoist put his fingers to his chin with a smile and said that they were really ahead of them, and then they were already losing to them. The blue-eyed girl looked at him at that moment and thought that this was truly incredible magical power. She saw how the most powerful streams emanated from him and thought that she could not believe that such power was hidden inside this person. But then she was distracted from her thoughts by the question of why it would be difficult to implement and asked what the problem was, to which she said that there was no energy to activate the gate. The guy was a little surprised and asked about the energy in the gate, to which she immediately said that she apologized for not explaining. Suddenly she looked at him with a sweet look and said that the gate, in the language of the dynasty, means the gate of pleasure, and he can think of energy as a life force. The hero smiled haughtily and turned away, asking if there would be problems if she were. Suddenly the servant perked up when he was asked about the woman. The protagonist imagined a vampire that absorbs the energy of seduced men. Then he smiled sweetly, clutching his cheeks, and thought about whether it was worth inviting her to dinner and getting dressed up, to which he immediately became indignant and asked to concentrate. Then the Taoist cleared his throat and said that this had already become a habit for him and asked about energy. He looked seriously at the guests and asked why they were passing on such important information to him, which was also unknown whether it would work. She looked up and said that there was something else, but the records were over 100 years old. The triplets once tried to open the gate, and they say that they combined their magical energy, thanks to which they were able to open it halfway. But the total amount of energy must be collected from magicians with the same mana, and therefore nothing worked. She immediately spread her hands and said that the problem is that the nature of power is different for everyone. To which the tailed one immediately asked if it was due to an imperfect combination. To which she immediately said that this is true, and if the 5 great magicians exist, then this will be possible. The protagonist majestically sat in his throne and focused his attention on the words that a huge amount of magical power is needed in order to open the gate, and it must be of the same type. He immediately smiled slyly and thought the guy made his servant bow and carry out the given order. The hero raised his hand and said that it is necessary to lead the people out so that no one is left in the area, to which he answered in the affirmative. Then the tourist closed his eyes and concentrated. There were remnants of particles floating around the castle around him. Afterwards, he began to study the surroundings with his ability and checked the training hall. Afterwards, he checked the well, and it was also empty. His eyes were shining brightly, and he offered to take a look. When he finished, he looked at the beauty and said that now there were only the 2 of them here, to which she immediately thought that he checked everything within a radius of 330 yards for people. The gray-eyed man smiled softly and asked if it was worth starting. She was very surprised and wondered if he was joking, and agreed. The Taoist began to release an aura and offered to take a closer look, because this was all the energy he had. Our story continues. A guest stood there utterly confused. How could one man possess such overwhelming magical power? A power so immense any normal body would have been torn apart from within. The hero, standing calm, pressed on. At first he admitted that power felt foreign, even painful. But with time he had learned to live with it. Yet even now it was far from normal. His energy did not fade naturally like others. Instead it clung to him, bound by a mysterious force, the binding force that chained his strength inside. Then, almost as if to prove it, he began to draw his energy back into himself. The sheer presence of it, even as it receded, left the air heavy. With an arrogant, amused smile, he asked others, "Well, do you have enough energy now to open the gate?" The white-haired girl looked on, wide-eyed, trembling. Only now did she understand. The energy they'd felt before had only been the leftover residue, not the true force he kept hidden. Tears spilled freely as she realized what a wild waste it was to use her power for something like this, merely to demonstrate strength. Suddenly she dropped to her knees, pressing her forehead to the cold floor. Through tears and snot, she cried out her understanding. She wished to devote herself fully to the heavenly demon palace. The hero blinked, surprised, almost embarrassed. After all, he'd heard magicians bow to no one. Through sobs, she explained she had no choice. The source of his overwhelming power was now clear to her. She pleaded, but he looked down at her with faint disgust, and with a flick of his power, sent her back. And just like that, the protagonist vanished. His speed, so sudden and absolute, left the blonde observer stunned. "Teleportation," she whispered, eyes wide. A year slipped by. Together they finally finished carving the stone. Someone asked nearby, "Is that it? Is that a gate?" The answer came quietly, "Yes, created by the magicians of the society." A Taoist stepped forward, poking it curiously with his finger. "It's just stone," he muttered. But then the blue-eyed girl interrupted, explaining that what couldn't be seen on the surface lay below, a vast altar hidden deep underground. The black-haired man clenched his teeth, a wild grin spreading across his face. Even if unseen, he felt the strange energy pulsing from the stone. Folding his hands behind his back, he asked if he might test it. She agreed, asking only that he pour his energy in slowly, carefully. He extended his hand, palm hovering above the stone, aura gathering in his veins. "Stand back," he warned. "It could be dangerous." Then with a deep breath, he released his power. Light exploded. The stone glowed, vibrating with hidden energy. Yu Xiang watched with narrowed eyes. It was incredible. Even as he poured in so much aura, the stone held strong, not a single crack. "It hurts my pride," he admitted quietly, his eyes flashing. The Taoist's gaze glowed blue. He pressed harder, pouring more and more aura into the altar. The magicians raised shields, fearing for their safety, while their leader struggled to believe so much power was truly required just to open the gate. Suddenly cracks snaked across the red stone surface. Light poured out, dazzlingly bright. Then with a final surge, the stone split apart. At its center floated another, Smaller stone, blazing brilliantly and releasing raw energy. A beam of power shot from the sky, washing over the entire castle. Smoke curled in the air as silence descended. The blue-eyed girl could only watch in horror, breath caught in her chest. And then, the hero stood there calmly beside the open gate. Relief and awe swept through the crowd. Their voices rose in praise, honoring him. The Taoists smiled softly under the weight of their words. Evening neared. Someone asked, "Is he coming with us?" The big man smiled broadly. "I'll go first," he declared. The hero asked why. The man only laughed. He believed that other civilizations waited beyond. The black-haired companion hesitated. "Shouldn't we find someone else? It could be dangerous." But the big man's laughter rolled on. Too long had passed since he'd seen the Western lands. Boredom pushed him forward. With solemn respect, he folded his hands, saying he'd go first to learn what lay beyond. And if danger came, the Lord would save him, just as he always had. The hero exhaled, a faint smile on his lips. "Go then." And so the red-eyed man stepped through the portal. His humility and restraint had earned the respect of the entire heavenly demon palace. Alongside the three great leaders, he had stood by the Lord to the very end. Without hesitation, he vanished into the unknown. Watching his back, the hero whispered silently, "Come home safely." But the years stretched on, 10 years, and the man did not return. Though some wanted to follow, Yusian forbade it. If even he had fallen, what hope did weaker men have? The hero turned to drink. Sitting alone, bottle in hand, he spoke to the wind. "Do you remember when we fought side by side, laughed together, cried together?" Another 80 years passed in quiet torment. At last he knelt beside a lonely tombstone, one among many. "What's the point of living when everyone leaves?" he whispered through tears. "What joy is there in being left alone?" He threw the empty bottle aside. No new graves had appeared in decades. Hands folded behind his back, he stepped toward the ancient portal. "It's time to build something new," he whispered. Energy curled around him, gathering, swirling into a towering spiral. In a flash, the hero disappeared, and that day the heavenly demon palace lost its master. Far away, night blanketed Seoul Station in South Korea. Coughing lightly, the hero stepped into the crowd. The air smelled strange. Covering his nose, he frowned. "Where can I rest? Somewhere with plenty of human energy." His steps led him to the bus station, and he stared at the waiting area with delight. A guest house, so spacious, he chuckled, even noticing the homeless scattered around. The perfect place. But the homeless men rose, suspicion in their eyes. One, crouching low, muttered words he could not understand. Annoyed, the hero propped his head on his hand. Then an idea sparked. The blue-eyed magician had once used information magic. Could he mimic that trick? Concentrating, he reached for the language buried in their minds. Suddenly, he spoke fluently. "Why are you ignoring me?" he asked, startling the man. The tramp scratched his head. "Your accent got better. Where are you from?" The hero paused, scratching his ear. "Koryo," he lied, quickly picking the name from memory. "Koryo? Ah," the tramp shrugged. The hero then added that he'd come through the gate, searching the new world. 100 years had passed since another like him had crossed. The homeless man didn't quite follow, thinking him a harmless madman. Together they approached Mr. Kong, who welcomed them, offering a seat. One man twisted his finger at his temple, calling him crazy, while another suggested taking him to the police. The hero's eyes flashed, he could read their thoughts. That glimpse let him speak calmly, even as suspicion buzzed around him. Kong invited him to sit, asking if he had a headache. The hero, hand raised, claimed dizziness, though truly his strength had drained. Even the best magicians struggled to read more than 2 minds at once. To read 5 was too taxing. The old man asked his name. At first the hero began to speak his true name but stopped. "One who," he said finally. The old man studied him. "Sounds Chinese. How old are you?" The hero shrugged. "Stop counting after 100. A drink was poured. Wonhu raised the glass and for the first time in decades tasted soju. Warmth flooded him, eyes shining. "Is there even better drink?" he asked eagerly. The homeless around him laughed. "That's the cheapest stuff there is." The hero grinned at the crumpled glass. "So if you get money, the drink gets better?" They admitted even they didn't know how to earn quick money. Then someone joked, "Why not go into the gate and awaken? That's the fastest way." One man added that someone at the station had done exactly that. Now he drove fancy cars. One who asked what they were waiting for, but the bespectacled man snapped that guys like them wouldn't get such a chance. Gate? One who repeated, intrigued. The others explained that gates had appeared everywhere, yet nobody knew who opened them. His mind raced. If I could only open one, who opened several? They asked what he'd done before, and one who began his tale. Once, a prince of Goryeo. The listeners nearly choked on their soju. Soldiers rebelled, the royal family slaughtered. Only he escaped, sold into slavery, then raised as a weapon in the secret destruction squad. When the demonic cult dissolved, those weapons were marked for death. Only 3 survived: Sandram, Yizhang, and himself. Together they took revenge and built the heavenly demon palace, which ruled the Min dynasty. The homeless gawked, half believing, half laughing, but one who bristled. This was no fairy tale. This was survival. A man in a Panama hat brought out beer and soju, calling it yin and yang. The Taoist pretended not to care but drooled at the sight. Light swirled in the cup as the drink mixed. One whose eyes went wide, feeling the rich energy. But the leader suddenly paled. Did we open the gate to heaven? Light burst from the bottle, swallowing the station. The air shifted. One who stood alone. An artificial plane, he murmured, sensing no natural energy. The homeless stared in awe. Above, a figure floated, glasses gleaming. I am the administrator of D1, the stranger announced. You have been chosen as participants of the gate. Accept our congratulations. And so, one who, once a prince, once a demon lord, found himself a challenger in a new game in a world unknown. In the SG of the Soul Branch, in the Control and Regulation Office, jumps were seen. The man in glasses stood behind the employees and demanded to report on the numbers of all jail. He stood calmly while they reported to him about the absence of anomalies in different areas. But suddenly one of the agents was very surprised when it came to Chungho. On the monitor, all the indicators increased incredibly and rose to 9 jail. The manager turned around in horror when the data was announced to him. He immediately spread his arms and screamed that this meant that the gate was about to appear, and asked what they had been doing all this time. Suddenly, one of the employees looked ahead with alarm and said that everything was normal until the program recorded them. Suddenly, the slick back guy pointed at the agents and ordered them to turn on the cameras at Soul Station and asked about which of the awakened were nearby. Suddenly, a guy with glasses appeared on the monitor, and the agent reported that an awakened level A lived nearby. The leader folded his hands behind his back and ordered them to contact him immediately, because he had to participate in this mission, and then asked the level of the gate, to which he was told about the presumed level, E or D. The leader adjusted his glasses and turned on his thought process, thinking that if the gate was not cleared, the energy release would lead to an explosion, and its power depended on the level of the gate and the speed of its development. The explosion of the Soul Gate would not only destroy the main roads, but also block traffic on lines 1, 2 at the airport, and on the KTX route. If it was a level D gate, then the businesses and crowded places nearby would turn into mountains of ash. One of the agents continued searching and said that the appearance of the gate would harm the homeless people at the station in Seoul, subway workers and passersby, and the second immediately said that there were 4 minutes left until the arrival of the suddenly. One of the informants sweated heavily and said that there was news about the gate. The leader was in complete shock when he heard that the gate had already opened. The homeless were still looking at the creature. The creature examined them and introduced itself as the coordinator. People could not take their eyes off him while he was talking about how they were chosen as participants in the gate, and they needed to accept sincere congratulations, and the number of participants at the moment is 214 people. Quan immediately went crazy and to be released and refused to participate, and then asked what SG was doing at all. But when the sphere in the sky began to emit energy, the coordinator immediately said that they should unite to hold out here for 7 days. A lot of rays came out from the sphere, and he continued saying that he was scanning the system, and after the scan was complete, using the inventory, the status window. People were locked in the spheres, and he continued and said about skill windows, completing a quest and experience points, leveling up, stat distribution will be available. The head of the homeless looked at himself and said that since the formation of SG, there have been no cases of ordinary people being pulled into the gate. He immediately called up the status window, which began to appear. He was level 1 and had average stats. He began to scroll through the icons and said that the indicators only slightly exceeded the stats of the average person. The hero immediately put his hand to his chin and thought. His status window sparked and did not start, and he asked what kind of nonsense this was. Then the tailed one scared the others, leisurely calling the coordinator. Everyone was in complete shock while the protagonist was acting like this. The men immediately tried to shut him up and asked him to be quiet. The homeless people began to scold him and surrounded him, saying that they shouldn't anger him and asked if he really didn't know such basic things. But then the Taoist again behaved like a redneck and shouted insults at the instructor, ordering him to go down. He only looked at it with alarm and meaningfully kept silent. He began to disappear and said that they had 10 minutes and could choose the desired items from the inventory, because in 10 minutes the attack would begin. When only particles remained, a voice was heard that told them to pray that God would grant them a chance to survive here. The homeless people surrounded the time traveler and breathed a sigh of relief, continuing to scold him. Everyone immediately began to call up the inventory. The hero did not understand what was happening and asked what it was. He looked at the inventory window with a distorted face and was offered to choose a weapon that could be used in battle. And if he did not do this within 10 minutes, he would not receive anything. But the tailed one immediately waved it off and said that he did not need it. And the refusal worked. Then the leader came up to him and asked why he talked to the leader like that. Because if you do not follow the rules, you will die. But the Taoist looked at him with incomprehension and said that he just wanted to ask something. But the old man looked at him and said that he really was crazy. He grabbed his hand and told him to follow him. The homeless man pulled him along and told him not to leave him, because this is the only way to survive. The bald man approached him and asked if he was sure that he could protect him, to which the old man immediately asked if he was suggesting that he leave this kid to die. The hero immediately became embarrassed looking at him, and then he smiled with glowing eyes and said that, of course, it would be safest to be near him, and said not to worry because he would definitely protect him. To which the old man sighed and said with displeasure that he had completely lost his mind, and then he spread his hands and asked him where his weapon was, to which he said that he simply did not need it. Khan immediately squeezed the baton and said that his weapon was a telescopic baton and offered to take it. But the hero again refused, saying that he simply did not need it, but he insisted. After the notification, he became even more insistent, but the protagonist no longer listened to him because the first battle would soon begin. He looked straight ahead and thought about what about 500 people felt. In the distance, huge monkeys were running, weighing more than 200 GINs, and their number, mass, and speed exceeded people. The evil Bibizon was already approaching with a wild smile. The homeless tried to concentrate while the others were running and assumed that the enemy was 3 to 4 meters tall. The homeless gathered their will into a fist and took up arms, shouting that they were just monkeys and they could easily deal with them. The hero stood calmly during the entire run and thought that the monster's muscles were much superior to humans and wondered if they should destroy them. Suddenly, the leader approached him and addressed him. Immediately after, he went crazy while his comrades were holding him and asked if he had gone crazy since he was going there, but he was asked not to leave the circle because it was dangerous. Incom looked after his new friend and demanded that he return while he was walking towards danger. A flock of monsters was right in front of the warrior who released the aura. The monster was already ready to strike, but Yuzian lit up and calmly said that it was worth teaching these rude people the doctrines of the heavenly palace. The macaques jumped on him in a crowd to attack. The homeless people immediately got scared and were about to run, but then the monsters froze. They were in complete shock, standing in a pile of dust. It turns out that the target of their attack had disappeared. The hero stood on the head of one of the monsters and said that the first teaching of the heavenly palace of demons says the following. He put his hands behind his back and said that they need to worship the heavenly God. They tried to catch him, but he immediately jumped off and said that he had roughly estimated their physical abilities. The protagonist turned around menacingly and said that now they need to test their endurance with the help of punishment with a whip. The monsters immediately got scared. He abruptly hit his hand, releasing a wave. The monkeys immediately received multiple injuries and flew apart. The gap passed along the ground, scattering the army. Notifications about leveling up poured out like a river. The protection system of the awakened, who raised his level for the first time, was turned on, and all the monsters around immediately froze. The hero looked at the notification window, where it was written that from the next level up, the time stopped to protect the awakened will not function. The guy looked around and thought about why everything suddenly stopped. He was going to poke after the notification that it was necessary to distribute 10 stat points in 10 minutes and asked what he should do. Suddenly, scanning errors in the inability to measure the object's abilities flew again. Suddenly, his status window appeared with unknown data. An aura immediately enveloped him, and notifications came out that due to an action, points were distributed randomly. He looked at his hand with an aura and said that now he understood that this is the awakening that those guys were talking about, and the strength itself increases. He closed his eyes, imagining a victory over a monster, and said that if you kill monsters inside the gate, then with the help of the kid who is called the system, you can awaken, and with the increase in level, you become stronger. And this is a pretty good system. But he immediately released a huge amount of energy and said that he did not need it. His eyes glowed, and he said his power was not so simple, and only he himself could awaken it. A clot began to form in his hand, and he immediately said that it was good that the energy was so pure. He smiled with all his teeth and said that he could now use it. After the appearance of the Raisingen, the system wrote that an error had been detected, but he told her not to reject it. The protagonist continued to accumulate energy and said that if he entered his territory, he would not be able to escape. And then notifications appeared that due to an unknown error, the stats were not distributed and there was a failure in the system. Yu Xiang pressed his hand to his chest and used aura when his level returned to first. The monster slowly resumed moving after removing the protection. The time stop effect was removed and the monkeys rushed to attack. Suddenly, something cut through their bodies with lightning speed. The hero, like a demon, chopped everyone around. Notifications continued to pour in and give errors. The tailed one held a weapon in his hands with a smile and shouted that this was great, because for killing only 4 of these creatures, he received as much energy as it would take him 6 months to restore. All the monkeys instantly froze looking at him. The guy immediately rushed in pursuit and ordered them to come to him, calling them Dasharak. The homeless watched this spectacle in a stupor. The system issued an achievement about defeating a huge group of monsters and mentioned that it was incredible that the player single-handedly destroyed 100 members of the tribe, and a rune was issued for the player, as well as installation details and a choice of actions. But the hero again waved it off, saying that he did not need it. Suddenly, he was again inundated with notifications, and he meaningfully remained silent. The Taoist went crazy and began waving his arms, saying that he would not accept anything and asking where so many achievements came from. Suddenly, the system praised him for his modesty and automatically gave him a rune, but he continued to stand his ground. It was a legendary rune that increased experience by 30%. The tailed one suddenly calmed down and agreed with a smile, because this way he could accumulate power better. A protective rune was received. At this time, his newly made comrades were watching him. The homeless admired him and his abilities, saying that it was a huge relief that there was an awakened one among them. But then one of the crowd called out to the others in a trembling voice. He frowned and said that if he cleared out everything for the aces, then they would not be able to awaken even while in the gate. He grabbed the blade and said that they needed it to get rich, but then he was immediately asked if they were strong enough for this. The leader immediately began to rush forward with anxiety and shouted that this was certain death. But the swordsman immediately smiled and asked not to stop them, because the kid seemed to be having a hard time and should help him. Half of the homeless people huddled together and were afraid of what was happening. The hero put his hands behind his back and asked if Incan had seen what had happened and reminded him that he had said that he would save him. They began to discuss food and what was in the inventory, but then they were called. A young guy with puppy eyes looked at them and asked what they should do. Then the hero calmly looked at him and asked why they were asking him and said that he would catch the instant noodles himself. Everyone was surprised after these words, and the protagonist corrected himself by saying about monsters. Suddenly, the employee raised his hand and said with concern that he was a subway worker and therefore was approximately familiar with the procedure for operating in the gate, which was proposed by SG and almost all of them civilians, and asked if it would be better if the mission was led by an awakened one. But then the protagonist looked at him with incomprehension and said that he was not awakened. And then the employee lost all his confidence when he saw what nonsense the hero was doing and realized that he was not from SG but was just talking about martial arts. And the old man held him by the shoulder and regretfully said that his friend was a little sick in the head. Yu Zhong immediately became indignant and asked what was wrong with his head and asked why he still did not believe him, to which he immediately asked how he got here, to which the hero immediately said that he created the gate. The leader immediately made a face and sarcastically pretended to believe him. But then the enraged protagonist asked him to stop and pointed his finger at the crowd. The guy with the scar put his hand to his chest and asked again in surprise. He was very surprised when he appointed him as the main one and asked why. But then the Taoist looked at him calmly and said that he heard everything and he had no choice because he was the only awakened one among them. All the homeless people immediately turned their gaze to him. The guy they pointed at suddenly lit up. He immediately got furious and asked how he found out. The protagonist frowned and answered that he simply felt the energy flowing in his body, although everything was visible in his eyes. The interlocutor closed his eyes and noted that the guy was more outstanding than he thought, after which he admitted that he was the awakened King Syrian. He frowned and explained that according to the Lin has no right to act in the gates of another country, although he is a member of the Chinese CSG. Yu Xiang put his hand on his shoulder and asked him to do as he was told. He smiled menacingly, releasing some of his power, and said that he would die if he refused, and life was more important than some convention. The man sweated looking at the hero's fingers, and he demanded that he do something about the people already. Kang remembered how the long-haired man fought and thought that the world was full of strong creatures, but few of them could deal with an entire tribe of Nuka with such ease. The protagonist smiled and his eyes sparkled, while the interlocutor wondered if he was a high-level ranker who should be in the top 200, but for some reason, no one knew about him. Finally, the man nodded and agreed to save the people first. Yu Xiang turned around, waving his hand, and said that he would go fight alone and the brunette would take care of the others for now. The awakened one made a hand gesture and reminded him that in the E-level gate, on the second day, monsters begin to attack everyone indiscriminately, and the brunette asked again. The man raised an eyebrow, not believing that he really didn't know. He introduced the man in the cloak and said that the coordinator here called himself D1C, and his name code contained information about the gate. The man remembered the half-gorilla and explained that the first letter denoted the strength of the monsters, and if the rank was even a little lower, then even those dead people would be able to cope with the monster and awaken. Then the man presented a table and said that the middle number denoted the type of mission, protection, as in their case, attack and raid. The last letter denoted the difficulty of the gate and was determined by the number of participants. The fewer there were, the higher the level. He remembered the diagram and added that if it was C, then the difficulty level was uniform for the number of participants. The protagonist yawned when the interlocutor clarified whether he understood and nodded. Kang sweated, trying to figure out whether the guy really knew nothing or was just pretending. The man stood in front of the long-haired one, asking his name, and the hero said, Wang Hu, after which the awakened one warned that tomorrow anyone could become a target. Although today, on the first day, the enemies attacked only the first attacker. The others whispered anxiously when the man said that then no one would be able to avoid the battle. Yu Xiang arched an eyebrow in displeasure when the interlocutor said that he would take command and try to hold out so that the hero could deal with the monsters as quickly as possible, and the guy agreed that he did not see a more suitable option. The other man crossed his arms, listening to the clear explanation, while the brunette asked if the level goes up with every 3 to 4 monsters killed, to which he received the answer that it depends on the monster. The protagonist raised his hand to his lips and thought about it, when the awakened one added that with the level up, the experience points also change exponentially. Kang raised an eyebrow in confusion, thinking about the fact that for some reason the interlocutor continues to ask as if he knows nothing. 2 men approached the awakened one, asking how difficult the D level is, and he answered that it is very much so. He frowned and thought to himself that it is impossible for 2 awakened ones to clear it. The man looked at the hero, who was talking to another man, and noted that even if he showed incredible strength and killed everyone, most of the civilians would die. The news anchor looked into the camera and reported that 5 days had passed since the gate appeared at the station in Seoul, which is the center of logistics. His co-host frowned and added that scientists had always predicted the gates using the GL count, but they hadn't been able to detect this one, and it was the first time something like this had happened. The man with the mustache closed his eyes and said that according to SG's official statement, it was a D-level gate, and all the participants were civilians. The man looked at him and asked for the number, and he replied that they didn't know how many homeless people were there. So it was hard to give an exact number, but it was probably between 200 and 230. The people watched the screen, hearing that there was not a single awakened person among them. Jiho stood in front of the monitors as the voice said that the gate clearance rate was extremely low, and if they couldn't complete the mission within the next 48 hours, the gate would simply explode. The bespectacled man frowned and asked his subordinate how the evacuation of people from enterprises within a radius of 2 kilometers was going, and the interlocutor answered that there was no one left within a kilometer, but those further away refused to evacuate. Jiho adjusted his glasses and muttered that it was crazy, while the man added that previously, An explosion from the gate rarely went beyond 1 kilometer. The manager clenched his fist in displeasure and was indignant that they were worried about business when their lives were at stake. And after all, the managers would not go to work, unlike ordinary workers. He turned to the deputy and asked her to write that they insisted on evacuation, and in 2 hours reporters would come. They would be shown mail and calls, and they would write articles about how enterprises did not care about the safety of workers. The man looked at him and accepted the order, after which the boss asked if they had found out the identity of the homeless man. Was there any confirmation that he was Junior Lieutenant Kim Hong? There was a man in a cap in the photo, a 43-year-old police academy graduate. The bespectacled man remembered how he left, as he was demobilized due to his high sense of justice, although his comrades and he himself respected him as a sunbae. The branch manager frowned and muttered that it would be good if he took over the leadership and was able to clear the gate. The deputy looked at his interlocutor and reported that there was no information about the man in strange clothes who was standing next to him. He rubbed his neck and said guiltily that they hoped that the search would not be difficult due to his appearance. But nothing could be found, as if he appeared there out of nowhere, not even false information. In the picture from the camera, it was clear that the main character's face was covered by a bluish glow, and this alone aroused suspicion. Joo-ho put his hands in his pockets and replied that all the people who were nearby were caught in the gate, so there was no way to find out anything, and all that was left was to wait for the gate to open, which would happen in 2 days. He stood with his back to his interlocutor, adding that everyone might already be dead. Sometime later, there was filming from the station, where the reporter said that there were 2 hours left before the gate would close, and for safety reasons, the journalists were evacuated. So the broadcast was being conducted from cameras installed inside the station. School children and a teacher were looking at the screen when a voice asked all residents to pray. In the browser, viewers wrote caustic comments under the broadcast that they wanted to specifically watch the explosion, and in the meantime, there were 5 minutes left before the closing. The journalist sweated, holding the microphone, and began counting. He opened his mouth and said loudly, 1. A bright light appeared above the building. Yoo-ho nervously watched what was happening on the screens. He frowned and asked if the gate had really not exploded yet. A bluish-purple glow appeared, and the man assumed that the D-ranked gate had been cleared. A powerful pillar of light shot out. All the homeless and other people came out onto the street, and the commentators were surprised that they survived. Khan frowned, thinking about how the hero almost single-handedly dealt with so many monsters, and then disappeared while exiting the gate. The man walked forward, dragging his comrade, wondering if he was dreaming all this. A helicopter appeared in the sky. Yoo-zeon looked at it with delight, wondering how they came up with this. He ignored the looks of the passers-by, muttering that Khan said that clearing the gate was like a miracle. So the guy ran away immediately so as not to cause a stir, but it was unclear what to do now. The brunette put his hands behind his back and decided that he could earn some money and buy that flying thing. Suddenly, the hero stopped. His eyes widened as he recognized someone. A man passed by, whom the guy called Sangram. The man looked back and asked if someone had called him. The protagonist smiled happily and asked if it was him, but in response, he saw a shocked and pale face. Sangram turned around and started running, while the brunette exclaimed that he did not expect to see him here. The guy squeezed his hand in displeasure when he saw that his friend did not want to talk. The protagonist grimaced and angrily muttered, "How dare he run away from him?" And that's the end of this chapter. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to like, comment which part hyped you the most, and subscribe for the next episode. See you in the next upload.